So we're going to examine first the darkest chapter of Jacob's life. And so we'll start that in Genesis 37. And in Genesis 37, we have the story of Joseph. And I'm calling this the darkest chapter in the life of Jacob. And you know the story, if you know your Bible, that Joseph was specially loved by his father. Verse 3 tells us this. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. So, the entrance into this chapter of Jacob's life brings us in contact with tragedy, with the unexpected. And the unexpected, you could say the worst thing that could happen. And many times in our life we are confronted with what seems like the worst possible thing that could happen. Here you have Joseph, who's about 17 years old at this time. He's the apple of his father's eye. His father loves him dearly. They're close. And in fact, they were so close that you can tell that Jacob, of all his sons, the only one that he truly trusted was Joseph. And we know this because he sent him at times to check on the other boys. And we also know about the dreams, but there's also this fact that at times Jacob had dispatched Joseph to check on things, see how they were going. And in one of those times that he had done this, he had brought to him a bad report. And so we'll pick up the story in verse 13. So he trusts Joseph. He trusts him to check on things for him. In verse 13, and Israel said unto Joseph, do not thy brethren feed the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send thee unto them. And he said to him, here am I. So Joseph is specially loved of his father and trusted above all his brethren, even though he's the youngest. I mean, Benjamin's probably an infant, 1 or 2 years old at this time. And so Jacob trusts Joseph. Joseph is obedient son. They love one another in a special way. And so we know what happens in verse 14. He said unto him, go, I pray thee, see whether it be well with thy brethren, and well with the flocks, and bring me word again. So he sent him out of the vale of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And then, he can't find them. And in verse 18, he does find them. And when they saw him afar off, even before he came near unto them, they conspired against him, that is the brothers, against Joseph, to slay him. And they said one to another, behold, this dreamer cometh. So the animosity that they had sowed in their heart of envy now comes into full bloom in hatred. They hate him. And often when we teach this story, we focus on the life of Joseph and how all of these twists and turns take place. But we're going to do it a little differently, and we're going to focus not on the story of Joseph and all the twists and turns, but on the story of Jacob in this, and give some thought to Jacob and how things went. And we know that they conspire against Joseph. They throw him in the dry well. He's down there. Judah comes forward and says, all right, he's not going to give it. We're not going to get anything out of this if we just leave him in the well. How about, there's Ishmaelites going by on the plain while they're sitting there having their picnic. Joseph's in the well while they're having their picnic, which is kind of showing how callous their hearts were. They see the traders go by and they say, Judah speaks up and says, how about we sell him? We'll get something out of this then. And I'm thinking also that there was just a little bit of compassion, very, very slight, maybe a little bit of conscience in verse 26. And Judah said unto his brethren, what profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. And his brethren were content. So they make this agreement. By the time they get there, the Ishmaelites have gone, and now the Midianites are coming through, and they enact the same plan, though, and they sell him to the Midianites, help get him out, and ultimately he ends up to this caravan for 20 pieces of silver. And then now they've done the deed, and they have to come up with a way of dealing with Jacob, knowing that this is Jacob's specially beloved son, and they come up with a plan to deceive him. So he had appeared on the scene wearing that coat, that special coat that his father had made for him. In verse 32, and they sent the coat of many colors. Interestingly here, they don't actually bring it to Jacob. They find what was probably some servants. And most likely the reason they didn't bring it to Jacob is they knew how sad he would be. And they didn't want to be present at the time when the news arrived that his specially beloved son was dead. They probably didn't want to be there to see the grief, the tragedy, the look on his face. And they also thought, we probably won't be able to contain ourselves either. We'll lose it too. And we won't be able to hold it together and keep this terrible thing from him. So they sent servants to do their bidding, to take back the coat. And the servants in verse 32, and they brought it to their father and said, this have we found. Know now whether it be thy son's coat or no. And he knew it and said, it is my son's coat. An evil beast hath devoured him. Joseph is without doubt rent in pieces. So they had sent the coat back, stained with the blood of a goat. And an alternative here, I saw an old commentator wrote it this way. It would have sounded something like this. My son's coat. And then, with a trembling in his hands and a wringing of his hands and tears flowing down his eyes, he says, an evil beast hath devoured him. He puts it all together in his mind, what must have happened. And so you think, what's the worst case scenario? What's the worst thing that could happen? In this case, his son is apparently dead. But he'll never know for sure. Not only will he never know, there's no way to go find him. There's no way to get his body and bring it back. There's no way to give him a proper burial. All his love for Joseph, and he's been taken from him. And in all of this, it's made even sadder by the fact that it's a completely senseless tragedy. So Jacob responds in verse 34, and Jacob rent his clothes, which is not uncommon. In fact, I think Reuben had done that very thing earlier in this chapter when he went back to get him. Verse 29, and Reuben returned into the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit, and he rent his clothes. So we know that was a very common expression of grief in those times, was to rip your coat. And then it says, put sackcloth upon his loins. Now this is the first mention of this ever in the Bible. This particular, Reuben was so upset that he, ripped his clothes. But Jacob his grief was even greater. He not only rips his clothes off, But he takes what is a very rough garment. Sackcloth would be like, like a potato sack or something like that, black. And he puts it on his body such that it's on his skin, and it's not a pleasant feeling. It's this very, very rough garment that's rubbing up against his skin. And it says, and mourned for his son many days. And some have noted even for 22 years. He never actually stopped mourning. There was no closure for him in this. He was so devastated by this. He entered the darkest chapter of his life. The loss was so great, even it says in verse 34 or 35, some see this as probably some 20 days past. The family starts to worry about him and says, he's not ever going to get over this. He's not ever going to get better. He's never going to stop mourning for Joseph. He's continually in this state of mourning. So what they do is they start to talk to one another, and you can imagine family situations like this, like, so what are we going to do? He's not getting any better. He's continually in this state of mourning. Is this how he's going to live the rest of his life? And this is when people, a lot of times in this situation, they want to offer comfort, but we are so awkward in doing it. We're very, very awkward because it's very hard to know what to say, especially for the sons, because they're lying. And you could tell that the impact that it had on the sons was tremendous. You could see Judah's life begins to spiral out of control in the next chapter because he's probably feels so guilty. They didn't consider when they did this the full impact that it would have. And now the family, and you see these conversations happen in families sometimes, well, what are we going to do? Dad's not getting any better. He's in there, and he's continuing. Verse 35, and all his sons and all his daughters. We know he has the one daughter, so these are probably daughter-in-laws. Or maybe there's other daughters that were born as twins that we don't know about, but probably daughter-in-laws, rose up to comfort him. This is one of the hardest things in all ministry is, well, okay, so what are you going to say to him? What are you going to say to Jacob at this time? Are you going to say, you've got the rest of your life to think about. You've got other sons. You've got Benjamin to think of. You've got other things to be concerned with. It seems and appears that whatever it is that they had to say was wholly inadequate, because it says they rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And it's true, you cannot comfort a person who isn't wanting it. You might say, well, I know what to say. I'll go in there and I'll say, you know what? You got the rest of your life and it just falls flat. I know what to say. I'll go in there and say, well, at least you got Benjamin. I know what to say. I'll go in there and I'll tell him, I'll make his favorite meal. That'll cheer him up. You just see each one of the kids. Isn't it funny how kids of adult parents sometimes think, they're probably about 24. Reuben's probably about 24 or 25 at this time. And Joseph was 17, so everybody's in range in this age, the young adult age. When I know what we'll do. We'll tell him this. We'll bring his favorite this or that, and he'll get better. When a person doesn't want it, they're not going to get better. They're not going to. There isn't a magic saying or word that can be said or uttered in those moments of time. And that's why so many times in ministry, about the best thing that you really can do is just be with people. And you think for that one kind of witty phrase or maybe a Bible verse that you can offer up, but the person has to want to be comforted, and at this time Jacob doesn't want it. And he said, "For I will go down into the grave unto my son mourning." Thus, and that's saying, in this way, his father wept for him. I'm not going to get better. I am not going to get over this. I refuse. You'd say, well, and maybe I'll open up. Why is it that, among many other reasons, you might think that Jacob makes his mind up that he's not going to get over it? What things might have been running through Jacob's mind that caused him? What?
Oh, he's already had loss, and so much loss wallowing in it.
Yes, he just lost his wife, the mother of Joseph. Yeah. And now on top of this, the worst thing people say that can happen is to bury a child. Because you bury a parent is hard, very, very hard, but it's sort of expected that will happen. And then to bury a spouse is extremely difficult. But then again, it's something that you know in life could happen. But to bury a child, that many say is the hardest, because it's not expected in any way. So it's grief upon grief. The loss of Rachel compounded now by the loss of Joseph. Other things that may have been running through his mind.
Maybe the promise and Joseph's dreams.
Yeah. God had seemed to single Joseph out. Joseph was the most trustworthy. He was the most noble of his sons. He's the one that seemed to be the one that would, take charge of the family. Yeah, how does this make any sense? Anything else that he might have been thinking? Yeah?
I know from our family experience, when my brother died, my grandpa, and even my dad was like, why couldn't it have been me? You know, you think of a child having their whole life ahead of them, and they do not.
There's no doubt that his words here indicate that he wished that it was him. That wished that it was him, or it were him. He did. He didn't want to bear this. And that's, the sense of the word here is, I can't bear this. I can't. Other thoughts, yes?
Maybe he felt guilty for sending him.
I think so. I think he felt guilty. I think he felt responsible. I mean, what are you going to say? I mean, you send your 17-year-old boy out alone, and then the worst possible thing happens that could have been imagined, is that he was destroyed by a beast with no one there. I mean, it's unimaginable. He feels culpable. He feels like, it's probably could have been avoided. Yeah. I think there's that in it, mixed in it. He blamed himself for sending the youth by himself. And then in my notes, I had the loss of Rachel, and Joseph was too much. The idea about living a child is even more difficult than a spouse or parent, as hard as those things. Third, I put the lack of a funeral or burial. I mean, that had to be another part of it, an aspect of it, is there wasn't really any closure on this. And I also mentioned the senselessness of it. What was the point of all this? I mean, it doesn't seem to fit into the narrative. God's blessing seems to be gone. There's no explanation for it. And we know how he felt, because if you turn over to 42, This, we now fast forward 22 years. You say, well, how is he feeling about this 22 years after it happened? We know in verse 36 that he actually never did get over it. This is 22 years after it happens. Benjamin is now 23 years old. He's a grown man. He's probably married. He probably even has children. And Joseph, we know, has been in Egypt. A famine has now taken hold in the whole region of Mesopotamia. Jacob, who you have to give him credit at the beginning of 42, although he's in a state of constant sadness about this, he does not quit commanding the family. He doesn't. He's not in one of those depressions where you might say that he's not functional. He's functional. In verse 1 it says, "Now when Jacob saw there was corn in Egypt, Jacob said unto his sons, Why do you look one upon another?" So that's something a dad would say. So what are you guys going to do about this? You guys got a plan? You're sitting around just looking at each other here? So he's actually still commanding. He's still a commanding figure, even in his grief. And he said, "Behold, I have heard there's corn in Egypt. Get you down thither, and buy for us from thence, that we may live and not die." All right, you boys, get going. Let's do it. And so he sends them, but not Benjamin. And this is why we can say, people when they experience tragedy in their life, and I know this from being around people that have experienced it, they're never going to be the same. And so he says, "But you will not take Benjamin," because of the memory still haunting him about the loss of Joseph. And of course, when the brethren get to Egypt, Joseph is concealed. He says to them, "Hey, who are you?" And they said, "We're all the sons of the same man." "Oh, are these all the sons?" And they say, "No, there's one more." And that would be Benjamin. And to prove that they weren't spies and to prove they were honest men, he says, "Okay, bring him. Bring him. That'll prove that you're not liars. You say you have another brother, I want to see him." And so in verse 36, they report to Jacob. "And Jacob their father said unto them, Me have ye bereaved of my children. Joseph is not, and Simeon is not." Remember, they kept him in ward. "And ye will take Benjamin away? All these things are against me." You can see that Jacob's report about the evil days of his life, this is a very real thing for him. I've lost two. He says Joseph is not, which is, he never really knew what happened to Joseph. There was no closure to it. He was lost, apparently, the best they could tell. But he never really had closure on this. Simeon is now in ward in Egypt. And so the sons are saying, "We need to get Benjamin. We need to bring him. The man told us we got to bring Benjamin or he's not going to trade with us." And so Jacob is now confronted. He's got two choices. Send Benjamin or starve to death. And he chooses the latter. He's not going to do it. He refuses to do it. Reuben spake unto his father, saying, "Slay my two sons if I bring him not to thee. Deliver him into my hand, and I will bring him to thee again." He's probably thinking, well, if you're so responsible, how did this happen to Joseph in the first place? Because you notice he actually does assign some blame here. In 36, he says, "Me have ye bereaved of my children." You guys didn't take care of Joseph, or whatever happened, and now Simeon's gone. You think I'm going to trust you with Benjamin? So there's an element even in his heart that he still hasn't come to terms with what's happened. And so Reuben makes a suggestion. He says, "Look, I'll take Benjamin with me, and you can kill my two boys and that was 2 of 4, he had 4 boys. You could kill 2 of my boys if I don't come back." And Jacob's probably thinking, so what's that going to do? So then I'm lost. Benjamin and 2 grandchildren. This is not a particularly great suggestion at this moment. And so 38, and he said, my son shall not go down with you. I'm not going to do it. There's no way. There's no way that this is going to happen to me again. Everything's against me. And I think that's something that any of us might feel at a certain point in my life. He's saying, everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. Everything in my life has turned out bad. You think I'm going to let Benjamin go? There's no way. He said, for his brother is dead, and he is left alone. Of course, his brother, speaking of Joseph, his one true blood brother. If mischief befall him by the way in the which ye go, then ye shall bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave. So you can see what it was, the mischief of death. And he's basically saying, I'm old. If this were to happen, I'll never be able to live. This will end me. I'll go down. I'll never lift my head again. I can't bear it. So you see, the Bible is a reality book. This is the truth about how Jacob feels. Everything that could go wrong has gone wrong, and I'm not going to allow it. So the alternative is, so we're going to starve. Essentially, that's the decision that's made. And another, I think it's 2 years pass as we get into 43. It's a year or two. And the famine was sore in the land. And it came to pass, when they had eaten up the corn which they had brought out of Egypt, their father said unto them, go again and buy us a little food. So he's saying, all right, we're out of food now. Judah spake unto him, saying, the man did solemnly protest unto us, saying, ye shall not see my face, except your brother be with you. If thou wilt send our brother with us, we will go down and buy thee food. But if thou wilt not send him, we will not go down. For the man said unto us, ye shall not see my face, except your brother be with you. And Israel said, wherefore dealt ye so ill with me, as to tell the man whether ye had yet a brother? And they said, the man asked straightly of our state and of our kindred, saying, is your father yet alive? Have ye another brother? And we told him according to the tenor of these words. Could we certainly know that he would say, bring your brother down? And Judah said unto Israel his father, send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and thou, and also our little ones. I will be surety for him. Of my hand shalt thou require him. If I bring him not unto thee and set him before thee, then let me bear the blame forever. So Judah takes charge, and Israel, Jacob, actually trusts him. And Judah says, look, this is the way it is, Dad. All our kids are going to die. All of us will die if we don't do this. We have to do this. And Jacob, over his protests, allows for this.